My name is Gregory, and this incident took place last December when I spent an entire week alone in my house. My girlfriend had traveled to her parents' place for the holidays, while I stayed back due to work commitments. I live in a calm, quiet neighborhood in a small upstate New York town. The homes are spread far apart, and most residents on my street leave town during Christmas, which meant I practically had the entire block to myself. At first, I genuinely enjoyed the silence. I thought the solitude would be relaxing, a chance to catch up on sleep, binge a few shows, and soak in the holiday atmosphere alone. But what unfolded during that week still occupies my thoughts to this day. It happened on my second night by myself. Around 6:30 in the evening, darkness had already taken over outside. Light snow had been falling throughout the day, leaving a thin white blanket covering my yard and driveway. I was in the kitchen preparing a very basic meal, pasta with chicken. My girlfriend usually handles the cooking, and to be honest, I'm far from skilled in the kitchen. To avoid the house feeling too empty, I turned on the TV for background noise. Even though I appreciated having some time alone, the silence inside the house felt unfamiliar and unsettling. As I sat at the table eating, I heard something strange. It took me a moment to identify it. It sounded like someone singing. I muted the television and listened closely. The sound was unmistakably coming from outside. As it grew clearer, I realized the song was Jingle Bells. Initially, I assumed it might be neighborhood kids messing around, but the voice didn't sound young. It was clearly an adult man. I stood up and walked toward the front door, following the sound. With each step, the singing became louder. By the time I reached the door, it felt like the person was standing directly on my porch. A strange feeling settled in my stomach, though I still convinced myself it could simply be a caroller. When I opened the door, a man who appeared to be in his mid-30s stood under the porch light. He wasn't wearing a hat, and his coat looked far too thin for the cold weather. What struck me as the most unsettling detail was that he was completely absorbed in singing, staring down at my welcome mat as if he hadn't noticed the door opening. I forced an awkward smile, unsure how to react. I had never experienced Christmas carollers before, and I definitely hadn't seen a grown man doing it alone. He didn't appear threatening, more confused than anything. For a brief moment, I even wondered if he might have special needs, since he didn't acknowledge my presence at all. When he finished the song, I expected him to speak or leave. Instead, he inhaled deeply and began singing Jingle Bells again from the beginning, the same slow, off-key tone. This time, however, he lifted his head and locked eyes with me. My smile faded immediately. The situation felt deeply uncomfortable. I stood there pretending to listen, expecting him to stop after the second round. He didn't. He repeated the song over and over. I checked my phone and realized nearly 4 minutes had passed. Eventually, I decided it was enough. I thanked him politely and slowly shut the door. I assumed that would end it. But even after the door closed, the singing continued without pause. I returned to the table and tried to ignore it, but it became impossible. Something felt wrong. The man was still right outside my home, repeating the same song endlessly. I considered the possibility that someone else might be nearby supervising him, but I saw no one. The entire house began to feel invaded, as though someone was standing far too close to my personal space. I finished my meal distracted and uneasy. After about 10 minutes, the singing suddenly stopped. The abrupt silence startled me more than the noise itself. I cautiously walked back to the front window. The man hadn't left. He had repositioned himself to the end of my driveway. He stood motionless, facing my house. He wasn't singing anymore, just staring. Somehow, that felt worse. I cracked the door open and told him he was on private property and needed to leave. He didn't react. Nothing about the situation felt natural. I warned him that I would call the police if he didn't go away, then closed the door again. I watched him for another minute. He didn't move. I hesitated to actually call the police, worried he might be mentally unstable and that involving law enforcement could escalate things. Instead, I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and tried to calm myself. Before changing, I checked out the upstairs window. The man was gone. I felt immediate relief and assumed my threat had worked. I got into bed, turned on a lamp, and began reading to relax. About 20 minutes later, I heard a familiar sound, singing. My heart dropped. It was Jingle Bells again, this time coming from behind the house. I rushed to the back window. The man was inside my backyard, standing directly below my bedroom window, staring up at me while singing. I slid the window open and yelled that I was calling the police. The singing stopped instantly. He stood silently for a few seconds, then sprinted toward the lower-level back door. Moments later, the most horrifying screams erupted, loud, distorted, inhuman. The sound echoed through the entire house. Then came violent pounding. The back door shook as he kicked and slammed into it. I could feel the vibrations upstairs. That's when I realized that this wasn't just strange behavior. He was trying to break in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, begging them to hurry. I stayed on the line, gripping a baseball bat, backing into my closet, and locking myself inside as instructed. The screaming and banging continued, every second feeling like the door would give way. Suddenly, everything went silent. I stayed frozen until police arrived. They confirmed the door was still locked. Outside, deep footprints marked where he had stood and where he ran into the woods. The officers followed the trail briefly but stopped, saying it wasn't worth pursuing in the dark. They downplayed the incident, which disturbed me deeply. After they left, the house felt colder than ever. I double-checked every lock. I spent Christmas Eve and Christmas at my parents' house. The man never returned, at least not that I'm aware of.